She was surrounded by enemies, and no one in the room knew it but him. A billionaire CEO, a private dining room, three men who had spent months engineering her destruction, and one napkin, small, creased, pressed between manicured fingers, with a single word written in trembling ink: help. Cole Bennett had walked into that restaurant for a canceled meeting and a quiet drink. He walked out carrying a secret that would put his life, his reputation, and his daughter's future directly in the crosshairs of one of the most powerful corporate machines in the country. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and don't go anywhere. This story goes places you won't see coming, and when you're done watching, drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The restaurant was the kind of place Cole Bennett had no business being in. Not because he couldn't afford it, though the truth was, on most weeks, he probably couldn't, but because places like Hargrove's existed for a specific type of person. The type who wore watches that cost more than Cole's car. The type who laughed a little too easily and meant almost none of it. The type who had learned, somewhere along the way, that money wasn't just money, it was a language, a costume, a wall. Cole didn't speak that language. Never had. He pushed through the front door at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday, still wearing the same charcoal jacket he'd put on that morning for a meeting that had been canceled 40 minutes before it was supposed to happen. His client, a mid-sized logistics company with a suspected embezzlement problem, had texted him a 2-line apology and rescheduled for next week. Cole had been 3 blocks away when the message came through. He'd considered going home. Made it halfway to his car, actually, before his stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since noon. Hargrove's was the nearest place with a table. That was the whole story. No instinct, no fate, no cosmic alignment, just hunger and proximity. The hostess gave him a look that he'd spent years learning to read. Not unfriendly exactly, but calibrated, measuring. She took in the jacket, the lack of a tie, the slight wear on his shoes, and made a quiet calculation. "Just one?" she asked. "Just one," Cole confirmed. She seated him near the back of the main dining room, which was fine with him. Cole always preferred corners. Old habit. He ordered a water, asked for a few minutes with the menu, and then did what he always did in any new room. He looked. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't scan the room like a man in a spy movie, head swiveling, eyes sharp. He just settled. Breathed. Let the space come to him. His instructors at BUD/S had called it situational absorption, the practice of receiving information without actively hunting for it. Most people walked into rooms and immediately started filtering out everything that wasn't directly relevant to them. Cole had spent years training himself to do the opposite. The restaurant was about 2/3 full. Business dinners, mostly. A couple near the window who weren't talking, which meant they were either very comfortable together or very much done with each other. A table of 4 men in finance, loud in the specific way that men become loud when they're performing confidence rather than feeling it. And then, in the private dining area, partially visible through a frosted glass partition near the far wall, a dinner that made something in Cole's chest go still. He almost missed it. The partition obscured most of the table, but the restaurant's layout created a narrow sightline from Cole's corner seat. He could see maybe 1/3 of the room, a table, several figures, and one woman. She was young, early 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back and the posture of someone who had spent years learning to take up exactly the right amount of space. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and even from this distance, Cole could see the quality of the fabric, the precision of the cut. This was a woman who dressed like a statement. Cole recognized her. Not personally, but the way you recognize someone whose face had appeared enough times on magazine covers and business news segments that it became familiar by proximity. Victoria Ashford, 30 years old, CEO of Ashford Global, a holding company with its fingers in infrastructure, technology, and real estate across 14 countries. One of the most photographed executives in the country. Forbes had put her on the cover twice. Cole's first thought was simple. She's having a business dinner. His second thought, the one that arrived about 4 seconds later, quieter but much harder to dismiss, was something is wrong. He couldn't have explained it immediately. That was the thing about instinct. It rarely arrived with documentation. But he kept looking. There were 3 men at the table with her, all in suits, all positioned in a way that felt off. Not like colleagues arranged around a shared goal, more like a formation. 2 were seated on the same side as Victoria, close enough that leaving the table would require one of them to move. The third sat directly across, controlling the physical center of the conversation. The man across from her, older, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had probably once been handsome and had since calcified into something merely commanding, was doing most of the talking. Cole watched him push a document folder across the table toward Victoria with a deliberateness that had nothing casual in it. Victoria didn't touch it immediately. That was the first detail that mattered. Every person Cole had ever watched sign a document they wanted to sign reached for it with some version of the same motion, forward, slightly eager, unconsciously claiming ownership before the pen even came out. Victoria's hand stayed in her lap. Cole shifted slightly in his seat, angling himself with his back more fully to the wall. He picked up the menu and held it in a way that let him watch the partition without appearing to. He saw her phone get picked up. Not by Victoria. By the man to her left. The gesture was smooth, almost casual. He reached across, said something Cole couldn't hear, and placed the phone face down on his side of the table. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't protest out loud. That's not a business dinner, Cole thought. That's a cage. He watched for another 2 minutes, long enough to clock the man near the private dining room entrance, not a restaurant employee, despite the dark jacket, standing too still, facing the wrong direction for someone whose job was to manage tables. His eyes moved to the room, not to the guests. Security, private security, and not Victoria's. Cole set down the menu. He pressed his thumb slowly against his water glass, thinking. 8 years as a Navy SEAL had taught him many things, but the most important one was this. The difference between a bad situation and a catastrophic one was usually the amount of time you spent deciding which it was before acting. Rushing in felt like courage. Mostly, it was just noise. He needed more information. He picked up his phone and opened his notes app, a habit from his consulting days, muscle memory dressed up as professionalism, and wrote down what he'd observed. Not because he needed to, because writing it forced him to structure it, to identify the gaps. 3 men, private dining, phone removed, exit monitored, document presented, not accepted. Subject shows stress response, contained, practiced, not fear of the room, fear of scene. That last part was important. Victoria Ashford wasn't afraid of the men in that room the way a person was afraid of violence. She was afraid in the specific way that powerful people are afraid when they understand the full architecture of the trap they're standing in. She knew exactly what was happening. She just didn't have a way out. Cole ordered the salmon, asked the server, a young woman named Dana, whose name tag he memorized automatically, whether the private dining room was on a separate reservation system. It is, Dana said, slightly puzzled. It's a corporate account. Why? No reason, Cole said. Great spot. Just wondering if I could book it sometime. Dana smiled and went back to the kitchen. Cole ate slowly. 12 minutes later, something happened. Victoria Ashford reached for her water glass, brought it to her lips, set it back down, and left something on the white tablecloth. At first it just looked like a napkin, which it was, but she'd folded it with a specific pressure. Cole watched her fingertips press the edge down. Once, twice. And then she shifted slightly in her seat, and the napkin fell from the table edge to the floor, landing just outside the partition. A waiter appeared almost immediately, bending to retrieve it. Cole was already standing. Actually, I think that's mine, he said, appearing at the partition entrance with the easy confidence of a man who had simply gotten up to use the restroom and taken a slightly wrong turn. He picked up the napkin before the waiter could, smiled in a way that was both apologetic and completely settled, and turned back toward his table. He didn't open it until he was seated. One word, written in the firm, precise handwriting of a woman who had controlled boardrooms since her mid-20s. Help. Cole sat with it for exactly 30 seconds. He thought about his daughter, Maisie, 9 years old, currently at home with a sitter, probably 3 episodes into a show she wasn't supposed to be watching this late on a school night. He thought about the investigation firm he'd spent 4 years building from nothing, client by careful client, after his reputation had been dismantled by people who'd decided he was more useful discredited than credible. He thought about how much he had to lose. Then he thought about a woman in a frosted glass room with no phone and blocked exits, holding herself very carefully together in front of men who were taking something from her. He flagged down Dana. "I need to speak with the restaurant manager," he said. "Right now, please, not urgently, calmly." "Can you do that?" Dana blinked. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," Cole said, and his voice was so level, so completely unworried that she believed him. "I just need 2 minutes with whoever runs events. I'm an independent advisor." He removed a business card from his jacket, the one that said Bennett Consulting Group in clean gray type. "And I believe I may be able to help resolve a situation before it becomes a problem for your establishment." The manager, a compact, efficient woman named Sylvia, who clearly ran a tight operation, appeared at his table within 4 minutes. Cole explained, quietly and without drama, that he believed a guest in the private dining room was in distress, and that the men with her did not appear to be acting in her interest. He used words like corporate pressure and document dispute, and independent advisor, rather than words like trapped or help me. He asked if the restaurant had security cameras covering the private dining entrance. Sylvia looked at him carefully. "We do." "Good," Cole said. "Whatever happens in the next 30 minutes, I need you to make sure that footage is preserved. Don't let anyone request deletion. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Can you do that?" "You're asking me to—" "I'm asking you to protect your restaurant from becoming the location where something very bad happened that no one documented," Cole said. "That's all." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll make a call to our security company." "Thank you." Cole left enough cash on the table to cover the salmon, the water, and a generous tip. Then he straightened his jacket, ran his thumb once across the lapel, and walked toward the private dining room. He had no weapon, no backup, no clear plan beyond the next 60 seconds. What he had was a voice that had once talked a hostage negotiator through a communications blackout in a place he still couldn't name in polite company, a face that could hold perfectly still under pressure. And 10 years of training that had taught him the most dangerous thing a man could do in a volatile situation wasn't aggression. It was calm. He pushed open the partition door. All 4 people looked at him simultaneously. The silver-haired man's expression shifted in the specific way that powerful people's expression shifted when an unexpected variable walked into a controlled environment. One of the men flanking Victoria moved his weight forward, subtle, instinctive, territorial. Victoria looked at Cole, and for 1/2 second, so brief it barely registered, something moved across her face. Not recognition, not hope, exactly. Just the slight, desperate shift of a person who had dropped a message in a bottle and was now watching someone walk through the door holding it. Cole pulled out the chair across from the silver-haired man, sat down, and set his business card on the table. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, in a voice that contained no apology whatsoever. "I'm Ms. Ashford's independent advisory consultant. She requested I join this portion of the meeting." He glanced at Victoria with the practiced ease of a man who had told many convincing lies in very uncomfortable rooms. "Sorry I'm late." Victoria's hand resting on the table closed into the loosest of fists, then opened again. "Not at all," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. He looked at the document folder on the table, still untouched on her side, and then looked directly at the silver-haired man. "Why don't you walk me through what we're signing?" Cole said. It wasn't a question, and in that moment, in a frosted glass room in an expensive restaurant neither of them belonged in, the real fight began. The silver-haired man's name was Gerald Pruitt. Cole figured that out in the first 90 seconds, not because anyone introduced him, but because the leather portfolio sitting at the edge of the table had a small embossed monogram near the clasp. GP Old Money Habit. The kind of man who put his initials on things because he'd grown up watching his father do the same. Gerald didn't like Cole sitting down. That much was obvious. The way his eyes went flat and careful, the way his right hand moved fractionally toward the document folder. These were the tells of a man who had walked into this room with a very specific script and was now watching an unscheduled actor walk onto his stage. "I don't believe we've met," Gerald said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of a man who had spent decades using pleasantness as a kind of pressure. "No, we haven't," Cole agreed. He didn't offer his hand. "Cole Bennett. I handle independent advisory work for Miss Ashford on select matters." He let that sit for exactly one beat. This appears to be one of those matters. The man to Victoria's left, younger, with the tight jaw of someone perpetually suppressing irritation, leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Ashford didn't mention an advisor joining this evening." Cole looked at him the way you looked at a car alarm going off in the distance. Present, but not worth reacting to. "She mentioned it to me," he said simply, and turned back to Gerald. Victoria hadn't moved. Cole could feel her stillness the way you felt a held breath in a quiet room. She was watching him with the focused attention of someone trying to understand very quickly whether the person who'd just appeared was actually capable of what he was implying. He didn't look at her, not yet. Looking at her would signal to the room that he needed something from her. He needed the room to believe the opposite. "The agreement," Cole said, nodding at the folder. "Walk me through the structure." Gerald smiled. It didn't reach anything above his cheekbones. "This is a confidential internal matter, Mr. Bennett. I'm not sure I'm comfortable reviewing proprietary documents with someone I've never—" "You're comfortable reviewing them with her," Cole said. "And I represent her interests tonight. So." He spread his hand slightly, an invitation, patient, completely unmovable. There was a pause, the kind of pause that had weight to it. Gerald opened the folder. Cole read. He didn't let his face change. That was the discipline. Absorbing information and keeping your expression on a separate track, like two trains running parallel without touching. But his mind was moving fast and hard through what he was reading, tagging things, flagging inconsistencies, building a map. The document was titled Emergency Governance Transfer Agreement, Temporary Administrative Authority Provision. 41 pages. Dense language, the kind specifically designed to obscure rather than clarify. But Cole had spent 4 years in financial investigations before he'd gone independent, and he knew what he was looking for. Page 3. A clause that transferred temporary operational authority to the Executive Steering Committee, which, as far as Cole could read, consisted of exactly the 3 men currently sitting at this table in the event the CEO was deemed unavailable or incapacitated for standard governance functions. The definition of incapacitated ran for 2 paragraphs and included language so vague it could apply to a CEO who'd taken a long weekend. Page 11, financial disclosures showing Ashford Global in what the document called acute liquidity deterioration, a phrase that meant the company was supposedly hemorrhaging money. The numbers were specific, alarmingly specific, hundreds of millions in losses over the past 2 quarters. Page 22, the transfer trigger. Once Victoria signed, the committee assumed authority within 72 hours, with a minimum lock-in period of 18 months. 18 months. Cole turned to page 38 and read the restoration clause. It required a 2/3 board vote to return authority to the CEO, with a 60-day review period, meaning that even if Victoria immediately regretted signing, getting her company back would take the better part of 2 years, minimum, and only if she could convince a board that, by then, would likely have been restructured by the men currently sitting across from him. He set the folder down. "Where are the original financial audit reports?" Cole asked. Gerald blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "These disclosures reference a Q1 and Q2 audit." Cole touched page 11 without picking it up. "I don't see the source documents attached. Standard practice is to include the full audit when presenting liquidity data this severe. Where are they?" A flicker, small. Gerald's eyes moved to the man on his right, almost imperceptibly, the way people looked for confirmation when they hadn't expected to need it. "They're in the supplementary package," the man said, "which we hadn't gotten to yet." "Let's get to it," Cole said. Victoria spoke for the first time since Cole had sat down. "Yes," she said quietly. "Let's." Her voice was steady, But Cole heard what was underneath it, the specific tight control of someone who had been holding something in for a long time and was only now, in the presence of another person, beginning to let herself feel the pressure of it. The supplementary package took 4 minutes to produce. Cole suspected it had been intentionally left in a briefcase rather than placed on the table, another control mechanism, making the supporting documentation physically inaccessible unless explicitly requested. He paged through it without rushing. The audit reports were there, but they were wrong, not obviously, not in a way that would jump out at someone reading quickly or under duress. But Cole had spent enough time looking at financial documents to know what authentic ones felt like. These had the right headers, the right formatting, the right signatory blocks. But the margins were off. Fractionally, consistently, across both documents. He'd seen this before. Documents reformatted after the fact, copied, altered, rebuilt in software that didn't perfectly replicate the original template. Small things, the kind of things a forensic accountant would catch in an afternoon. The financial crisis wasn't real. Cole closed the supplementary package and set it on top of the main folder. He checked his watch. A habit, not a necessity. 31 minutes since he'd walked through that partition door. "I'd like to request a brief recess," he said. 20 minutes. "Ms. Ashford and I need to confer privately before we go any further with this." Gerald's pleasantness finally showed its seam. "Mr. Bennett, this meeting was scheduled at significant." "The document will still exist in 20 minutes, Cole said. "So will everyone in this room. 20 minutes. He looked at Gerald without blinking. "Unless there's a reason that's a problem." The implication landed exactly where he'd placed it. Why would 20 minutes matter unless you need to stop us from talking? Gerald leaned back. "Of course," he said with a smile that could have curdled milk. "Take your time." Cole stood. Victoria stood a half-second after him, and he noticed the slight hesitation as she registered that the man to her left had shifted, his body angling to block her path. Not aggressively, subtly. The way men who did this kind of thing learned to do it subtly. Cole moved to her side. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside. He looked at the man blocking the path with an expression of complete amiable blankness. "Excuse us," Cole said. The man held for one beat too long, then moved. They walked out of the private dining room together, into the main restaurant, and Cole steered them toward the short hallway that led to the restrooms, the only area without direct sightlines from the partition. He'd clocked it when he'd first sat down. The moment they were out of view, Victoria stopped walking. She turned to face him, and the composure she'd been wearing like armor showed, for the first time, its actual cost. Her hands weren't shaking, but they weren't entirely still either. "Who are you?" she said. "I told you, Cole Bennett. I know what you told them. Who are you actually?" Her eyes were sharp, direct, the kind of look that had probably made subordinates uncomfortable in boardrooms for the better part of a decade. "Because you read those documents like you knew what you were looking for before you opened them, and independent advisors don't show up uninvited to private dinners unless someone sent them." "Nobody sent me," Cole said. "I was eating salmon in the main dining room. You dropped a napkin." She stared at him. "I noticed the security at the entrance," he said, "and I noticed your phone was taken, and I noticed you weren't moving toward that folder the way someone moves toward something they want to sign." He paused. "Then you dropped the napkin, and I read it. That's the whole story." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. He could see her running some kind of internal calculation, trying to determine very quickly the probability that this man was exactly what he said he was, versus the probability that he was some other piece on a board she couldn't see. "The documents," she said. "What did you find?" "The audits are fabricated," Cole said. "The margins on both reports are inconsistent with the original Ashford Global document templates. I'm assuming you've seen enough of your company's paperwork to know what the formatting looks like. The financial crisis they're using to justify this transfer doesn't exist. Or if it does, those numbers aren't documenting it." Victoria closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, something had shifted. Not broken, not collapsed, but settled. Like a person who'd been dreading confirmation of something they already knew. "I've been asking for the source data for 6 weeks, she said. "My CFO kept telling me the full reports were being compiled. that the situation was fluid, that the numbers would make more sense in context. Her voice was flat with a very specific kind of anger, the anger of someone who'd given benefit of the doubt past the point where they should have stopped. Julian told me this meeting was a preliminary discussion, that nothing was being signed tonight. Julian Carrington? Cole asked. Her expression shifted. You know him? I know the name, Cole said carefully. He wasn't ready to get into why yet. He's one of your executive committee? Chief Operating Officer. He's been with the company for 11 years. She said it the way you said something that had once meant something and now meant something else entirely. He organized this meeting. Cole nodded slowly. He filed that away and kept his face even, though something in his chest had gone cold and tight in a way he hadn't felt in years. Okay, he said. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back in that room and you are not going to sign anything tonight. I don't care what they say. I don't care what pressure they apply. The answer is that you require additional time to review with your legal counsel, and you are exercising your right as CEO to delay any governance action until that review is complete. They'll argue the timeline. Let them argue. The moment they start applying pressure to bypass legal review, they've handed you documentation of coercion, which, combined with the fraudulent audits, is the beginning of a very serious legal case. He looked at her steadily. You are the CEO of this company, Ms. Ashford. Act like it. It came out harder than he intended. He saw her take it. Not flinch exactly, but absorb it. I've been acting like it for 8 years, she said quietly. That's the problem, apparently. Cole felt the sharpness of that and didn't try to walk it back. Fair enough, he said. Then you know how to hold a room. Go hold this one. They went back in. The next 40 minutes were some of the most tense Cole had spent in a civilian room, which was saying something. Gerald pushed. The man on Victoria's right, who Cole eventually identified from a crest on his cufflinks as someone named Harwick, tried a softer approach, talking about fiduciary duty and shareholder confidence and the optics of a CEO who appeared to be avoiding accountability. Cole let Victoria handle most of it. He interjected only when the conversation veered toward the documents, redirecting with questions that were almost impossible to answer without revealing the gaps in the fabricated evidence. He'd learned this in interrogation training. You didn't accuse, you inquired. You asked people to explain things in ways that required them to either tell the truth or build another lie on top of the existing one. Every time Gerald shifted toward the folder, Cole touched it first, opened it to a different page, asked another question. By the end, Gerald's smooth pleasantness had developed actual cracks. He was a man who had prepared for a specific performance and found the theater locked. At 10:08 p.m., Victoria stood. I will not be signing this tonight, she said. I am requesting full access to the original financial data, unredacted, within 48 hours. Any further discussion of governance transfer will be conducted with my legal team present. She picked up her phone, which was still sitting on the other side of the table, and held it for a moment before meeting Gerald's eyes. This meeting is over. Gerald looked at Cole. It wasn't a pleasant look. We'll be in touch, Gerald said. Cole held the look without expression. Looking forward to it, he said. Outside the restaurant, the October air was cold and carried the smell of the city at night. Exhaust, damp concrete, the faint distant sweetness of something cooking somewhere. Victoria stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and Cole watched her take one long breath. My car is around the block, she said. Don't go home, Cole said. She turned. Excuse me? If they move this fast, they have people watching your building. Standard playbook when you're executing a hostile internal takeover. You isolate the target, control their environment, limit their access to anyone who might help them think clearly. He said it matter-of-factly, not trying to alarm her, just moving through the information. You need to go somewhere they're not expecting. Do you have anyone you trust completely? Not professionally. Personally. Victoria was quiet for a moment. He watched her go through a mental list and watched the list come up shorter than she expected. My assistant, Maya, She stopped. I don't know. I don't know any more who knew about this and who didn't. Cole nodded. He understood that feeling. It was one of the worst feelings in the world. The moment the ground under your relationships stopped feeling solid. Okay, He said, I have an office about 20 minutes from here. It's not much, but nobody knows you'd be there. He said it plainly, leaving room for her to refuse. Your choice. Victoria looked at him. A woman who had run a billion-dollar corporation since she was 22, who had given interviews about trusting her instincts and knowing her own mind, was now standing on a sidewalk trying to decide whether to follow a stranger she'd met 45 minutes ago. You noticed the napkin, she said. Yeah. And you sat down in that room without knowing any of us, without backup, without... She frowned slightly. Why? Cole thought about it for exactly one honest second. Because you asked, he said. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't the kind of answer that wrapped neatly around itself. But Victoria Ashford looked at him when he said it and seemed to find something in it that she understood. 20 minutes, she said. 20 minutes, Cole confirmed. His office was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator worked, mostly, and the hallway smelled like old carpet and radiator heat. Cole unlocked the door and turned on the desk lamp rather than the overhead, which buzzed and flickered on bad nights. The space was small and specific. A desk covered in files, a whiteboard on the far wall with names and timelines in black marker, 2 chairs that didn't match, a coffee maker that was at least 10 years old but still did its job, a framed photo near the window. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, missing a front tooth, grinning at the camera with the total shamelessness of a kid who had not yet learned to manage her own face for other people. Victoria looked at the photo, then at Cole. My daughter, he said. Maisie. Victoria nodded. She sat in one of the chairs and pressed her hands flat against her knees, and Cole got the coffee going because he didn't know what else to do with his hands, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything. Then Victoria said, They're telling my board that the company is losing $400 million. I know, I saw the numbers. Ashford Global made $312 million in net profit last quarter, she said. I signed off on those reports myself. I watched the numbers come in. There is no crisis. Someone built one on paper, Cole said, which means someone had access to your financial systems. Someone who's been inside the company long enough to know what the documents look like and how to replicate them. Julian, she said. Not a question. That's where I'd start, Cole said. But I'd want to follow the money before I said his name anywhere out loud. Because if he's the one who built this, he didn't build it alone, and naming him without evidence gives the whole structure time to disappear. Victoria nodded slowly. Her eyes had gone somewhere interior, working through it, Cole thought. Rebuilding the map of the last several months, looking for the places where the picture had been wrong, and she hadn't let herself see it. Tell me about the documents, Cole said. The margin inconsistency. Has your company changed its internal template system in the last 2 years? No. We standardized everything in 2021. Same templates company-wide. Then someone rebuilt those audit reports in a different program and didn't get the formatting quite right. He pulled out his own notepad, actual paper, actual pen, another old habit, and wrote it down. That's recoverable. If we can get access to the metadata on those files, we can see when they were actually created versus when they were supposedly compiled. Forensic accountants do this routinely. Victoria looked at the notepad, then up at him. You worked in financial investigations. For a while? Before the consulting. He didn't answer immediately. I looked you up, she said, while you were getting the coffee. Bennett Consulting Group. You've been operating for 4 years. Before that, she paused. There's a gap. And then some things that are very unflattering from a couple of financial news outlets. A failed investigation. Credibility questions. Cole set his pen down. He'd known this was coming. It always came. Yeah, he said. What happened? He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I uncovered a financial fraud network about 6 years ago. Shell companies, ghost vendors, money moving through fake contracts. I had solid evidence. He paused. The people involved were connected to enough powerful players that the investigation got buried. And I got buried with it. Victoria was quiet. The outlets that ran the unflattering pieces, Cole said. 2 of them had the same 3 sources, all connected to people who wanted the investigation gone. He said it without heat, which was the only way he could say it anymore. He'd burned through the anger years ago. What remained was just the shape of it. I spent about a year fighting it and another year accepting it. Then I built something new. Victoria was looking at him differently now, not with pity. He was glad for that, with something more like recognition. The ghost vendors in those audit reports tonight, she said slowly. The shell company structure they used to manufacture the fake losses. She stopped. I know, Cole said. You recognized it. The moment I saw page 11, he met her eyes. It's the same structure, Ms. Ashford, same architecture. Whoever built the fraud I investigated 6 years ago, or someone who learned from them, built the one that's living inside your company right now. The coffee maker beeped. Neither of them moved for a moment. Outside, the city kept going. Traffic, distant sirens, the ordinary relentless noise of a place that didn't stop for anyone's crisis. In the small office with the mismatched chairs and the photo of the gap-toothed kid by the window, two people who had both lost something to the same invisible machinery sat across from each other and understood, without fully saying it yet, that they had found each other for a reason that had nothing to do with a canceled meeting and a quiet dinner. It had been building toward this for 6 years. They just hadn't known it yet. The coffee went cold before either of them touched it. Cole was at the whiteboard. He'd uncapped a marker without really deciding to, the way his hand sometimes moved ahead of his thoughts when a problem got its hooks into him. He'd written 2 things so far. On the left side, Ashford Global, current. On the right side, Meridian Network, 2018. In the middle, nothing yet. Just blank space and the faint ghost marks of whatever he'd been working through on this board before tonight. Victoria watched him from the chair. She'd taken off her blazer somewhere in the last 20 minutes and folded it over the armrest with the automatic precision of someone who folded things without thinking about it. Her white blouse had a small coffee stain on the right cuff that Cole was fairly sure had been there before she'd walked into the restaurant. The kind of detail that made her seem suddenly and unexpectedly like a person rather than a cover story. Meridian Network, she said, reading the board. That was the fraud you investigated. That was what I called it, Cole said. Nobody ever gave it an official name because it never became an official case. He drew a line between the 2 columns, not connecting them yet, just acknowledging the space between them. Meridian was a web of about 40 shell companies operating across 6 states. On paper, they looked like vendors. IT services, logistics contractors, facilities management. They had websites, registered addresses, even some basic staffing, but every contract they held was with a single source. Which was? Cole turned from the board. A mid-size investment holding company called Vantage Meridian Partners. Family-owned, publicly quiet. Very, very connected. He paused. They moved somewhere between $80 and $120 million through those ghost vendors over roughly 4 years. My estimate, I never got to verify it with full records because the records disappeared before I could subpoena them. Victoria was very still. How did you find it? A bookkeeper, Cole said. Woman named Patricia Shen. She worked for one of the shell companies, thought she was employed by a legitimate IT firm, and noticed that the company's actual work product was essentially nothing. They billed enormous amounts. They produced close to 0. She brought me invoices, 70 pages of them. He set the marker down. 6 weeks later, the invoices were gone. Patricia had been pressured into signing an NDA, and I was the subject of 2 separate news stories questioning my methodology and my credibility. Who ran the stories? A financial reporter named Douglas Haynes, good writer, very confident. His 2 main sources were both connected, through 2 degrees of separation, to Vantage Meridian's board. Cole said it without bitterness, which took effort even now. I tried to trace it at the time, couldn't prove enough to make it stick. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, Cole, I need to tell you something. He looked at her. Vantage Meridian Partners, she said. I know that name. The room went a little quieter, or maybe it was just that Cole became more aware of the silence in it. Talk to me, he said. Victoria stood up. She moved to the window. Not to look out of it, Cole thought, but because sitting still wasn't working anymore. About 6 years ago, Ashford Global was expanding into infrastructure contracts in the Southeast. Big projects. We needed regional partners who knew the local procurement landscape. She pressed her fingers against the windowsill. Julian recommended Vantage Meridian as a consulting partner, said they had strong government relationships, good track records on regional bids. I approved the engagement. Cole was very still. We used them for about 14 months, Victoria continued. They provided what looked like legitimate advisory work, introductions to regional contacts, some market analysis documents. We paid them. I'd have to pull the exact figure, but I believe it was somewhere in the range of $8 to $11 million over the engagement period. She turned from the window. Her face was composed, but her eyes were doing something complicated. When their consulting contract ended, I didn't think about them again. Until right now. The marker was still in Cole's hand. He set it down on the whiteboard tray very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands weren't entirely trustworthy. The investigation that buried me, he said slowly. The one that disappeared. The records I couldn't subpoena. He stopped. Started again. Ashford Global's payments to Vantage Meridian would have been one of the legitimate-looking revenue streams that made their balance sheets appear real. Victoria understood what he was saying. He could see her absorb it. My company, she said, may have provided cover for the network you were investigating. Without your knowledge, Cole said. Without my knowledge, she agreed, but her voice had gone tight. Which doesn't make it, I should have. Julian handled that relationship. I signed off on the engagement budget, but I didn't review every contract detail. I trusted his recommendation because he'd been with the company for. She stopped. That doesn't matter. I should have looked harder. You couldn't have known what you weren't told, Cole said. He meant it, but he also registered somewhere in the honest part of himself that this was a complicated thing to feel neutrally about, because the legitimacy that Ashford Global's name had lent to Vantage Meridian had made the fraud harder to prove, had made him easier to discredit. He didn't say that out loud. Not yet. Julian recommended them, Cole said instead. That's the thread. Victoria nodded. Julian has been with Ashford Global since before I became CEO. He came up under my father's leadership. She said my father, in a tone that contained a whole separate conversation Cole decided not to open tonight. When I took over, he stayed. He knows this company better than almost anyone. The systems, the relationships, the board dynamics. She paused. Which means he would know exactly how to manufacture a financial crisis that looked real from the inside. And exactly which board members could be pressured and which ones could be bought, Cole said. He's had 11 years to figure that out, Victoria said quietly. Cole went back to the whiteboard. Now he drew the connecting line, solid, not tentative. Vantage Meridian on the right, Ashford Global's current crisis on the left. Julian Carrington's name went in the middle, underlined once. Here's what I need to know, Cole said, turning back. The ghost vendors in those fake audit reports. The ones manufacturing the fake losses. Do any of them have names that appear in your company's real vendor records? Any crossover? Victoria frowned. I don't have that level of detail in my head. I'd need to access the financial system. Can you do that remotely, without going through any of your standard corporate channels? I have root access to the financial reporting system. Direct login, not routed through the IT department. She paused. Julian pushed to change that structure about 8 months ago, said it was a security concern. I kept the direct access because, a rueful, short expression crossed her face. Because my instinct said no, and I didn't have a better reason than that. Good instinct, Cole said. He cleared a space on his desk and opened his laptop. It was not a new laptop. The hinge had a crack that he'd reinforced with electrical tape 3 months ago and kept meaning to properly fix. Victoria looked at it, and something passed across her face that might have been the beginning of a smile in different circumstances. Electrical tape, she said. It works, Cole said. I didn't say it didn't. She sat beside him, and he turned the laptop toward her, and for the next hour and 40 minutes, they went through Ashford Global's financial records with the focused, unglamorous attention of two people who understood that the truth lived in the details that other people found too boring to look at. What they found was methodical and damning, and somehow worse for being so carefully constructed. There were 11 vendor names in the fake audit reports, companies supposedly contracted for services ranging from cybersecurity consulting to environmental compliance. Cole ran each name through a business registration database he subscribed to for his consulting work. 6 of the 11 companies had been incorporated within the last 22 months. 4 had registered addresses that were mail forwarding services. 3 of the 6 shared the same registered agent, a law firm in Delaware that Cole noted down for later. The remaining 5 vendor names were real companies, legitimately existing businesses. But when Victoria cross-referenced them against Ashford Global's actual payment records, none of them had any invoices in the system. They appeared in the fake audits as vendors who'd been paid millions. In reality, no such payments existed. He built the crisis on 2 layers, Cole said, working it through out loud. The shell companies create the illusion of money being paid out that never was. The real companies lend legitimacy to the vendor list. If anyone spot checks, they find real businesses and assume the rest are real too. And the total fabricated loss figure is just under the threshold that would trigger a mandatory external audit, Victoria said, pointing at the screen. Cole looked at where she was pointing. She was right. The manufactured losses totaled $392 million, just below the $400 million threshold written into Ashford Global's own bylaws, as the point at which outside auditors were automatically brought in. He knew your bylaws, Cole said. Of course he did. He helped write them. Cole sat back. His chair made a sound it always made, a small complaint from the left rear wheel that he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months and hadn't. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, just breathing, letting the full shape of it settle. Julian Carrington had spent, based on what they were looking at least 2 years building this, possibly longer, if his connection to Vantage Meridian went as far back as Cole now suspected. He'd created a financial fiction precise enough to fool a board, structured a governance document to trap a CEO, arranged a private dinner designed to feel inevitable, and had men physically positioned to prevent Victoria from leaving or calling for help. This wasn't opportunism. This was architecture. He's been planning this for a long time, Cole said. He's been waiting, Victoria said. Her voice had gone very flat. For the right moment, the right pressure, the right... She stopped. I promoted him 18 months ago, gave him expanded operational authority over 3 divisions. At the time, I thought I was rewarding loyalty. She pressed her fingers to her mouth briefly, then lowered her hand. I gave him the keys. You trusted someone who'd given you 11 years of reasons to, Cole said. That's not a character flaw. It feels like one right now. Yeah, Cole said. It usually does. He meant it as something close to solidarity. She looked at him sidelong and seemed to understand it that way. Cole pulled his notepad closer and started building a list of what they had and what they still needed. Evidence in hand, the fabricated audit documents with provable formatting inconsistencies, the shell company registrations, the missing payment records, the restaurant security footage that Sylvia had agreed to preserve. Evidence still needed. The metadata on the fabricated files to establish when they were actually created. Financial records tracing money movement through the shell companies, and some thread connecting Julian directly to either Vantage Meridian or to the shell company registered agent in Delaware. That last piece was the hardest. It was also the most important. You could prove the fraud was built. You still had to prove who built it. Julian is careful, Victoria said, reading the notepad from the side. He delegates. He's never the person whose name is on anything sensitive. Everybody makes a mistake, Cole said. He's had 6 years to not make one. 6 years ago, he didn't think anyone was still looking, Cole said. Now someone is. He tapped the notepad. That changes what mistakes look like. Around 1 in the morning, Victoria's phone, which she'd been holding since retrieving it from the restaurant table, buzzed with a message. She looked at it, and Cole watched something cross her face. My assistant Maya, she said. She's been trying to reach me. She says... Victoria stopped reading, started again. She says Julian called an all-hands leadership meeting for tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. He's telling the senior team it's about the financial restructuring. Cole felt the shape of that drop into place. He's accelerating. He knows tonight didn't go the way he planned, Victoria said. He doesn't know what I know yet. But he knows I didn't sign, and he knows someone sat down at that table and… She stopped. He's going to move before I can build a case. How long to get a forensic accountant to look at those files? A good one? 2 days minimum if I can get them on short notice. Can you? I know someone, former Ashford auditor. She went independent 3 years ago. She owes me nothing professionally, which means she can't be pressured through the company. Victoria was already pulling up a contact. She's expensive. Get her, Cole said. While Victoria made the call, stepping toward the window, speaking quietly, Cole went back to his records from the Meridian investigation. He kept them in a fireproof filing cabinet that occupied far too much space in his office and that he'd carried with him through 3 moves over 6 years. At the time, keeping the records had felt partly like stubbornness and partly like grief, holding on to evidence for a case that was never going to be made. He pulled the Meridian files now and spread them on the clear half of his desk, 41 folders, organized by shell company name. He went through them with the specific feeling of someone returning to a place they'd tried to leave, finding it more or less how they remembered it. He found what he was looking for in the 37th folder. One of the Meridian shell companies, a supposed IT services firm called Nexus Compliance Group, had a registered agent filing from 2018 that listed a secondary contact for incorporation documents. The name on the filing was a law firm, Draper, Collis, and Webb, registered in Delaware. Cole looked at the name he'd written down an hour earlier from the current shell company registrations connected to the Ashford fraud. Same law firm, Draper, Collis, and Webb. He sat with that for a long moment. The law firm was a thread, not proof, not yet, but a thread that connected what Julian was doing now to what Vantage Meridian had done 6 years ago. A thread that suggested Julian hadn't just known about the Meridian network. He'd used the same infrastructure. Cole looked up at the whiteboard. At the name in the middle, underlined once. Then he picked up the marker and underlined it again. Victoria finished her call and turned back into the room. She looked at Cole's face and then at the whiteboard and then back at Cole. "What did you find?" she said. He told her. She stood very still through the whole thing, the way she'd stood in the restaurant, contained, precise, not letting the surface break. But when he finished, she sat down in the chair again, and the straightness in her spine let itself down just slightly, and she pressed both palms flat against her thighs. "He's been running this since Meridian," she said. "I think so. I think Vantage Meridian was a proving ground. He learned how to build the structure there, found the law firm, tested what worked and what didn't." Cole paused. "And when it worked, when my investigation got buried and the network held together, he filed the whole blueprint away and waited for the right opportunity." "My company," Victoria said. "Your company is bigger, better capitalized. The payoff isn't 80 million this time." "No," Victoria said. "It's everything." The radiator in the corner ticked and settled. Outside, a car moved down the street below, its headlights sweeping briefly through the gap in the blinds. Cole's phone screen lit up on the desk, a text from the babysitter asking if he'd be home soon. He looked at it and felt the two worlds of this night press against each other in the specific uncomfortable way they did when his work ran long and his real life waited. He typed back, "Not yet. She okay?" And the babysitter, bless her, sent back a photo of Maisie asleep on the couch with a book on her face and a caption that said, "Out cold. Don't worry." Cole looked at the photo for a second longer than he needed to. Victoria saw him look at it. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression shifted in a direction he couldn't quite name. He put the phone face down and turned back to the whiteboard. They had a thread now. A real one. Fragile but there. The same law firm connecting a 6-year-old buried fraud to the current manufactured crisis inside one of the most valuable companies in the country. A pattern of methodology that pointed to a single architect. Restaurant footage that documented coercion. Financial records that documented fabrication. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Not for a boardroom, not for a court, not for the kind of confrontation that would be needed to dismantle what Julian had built. But it was a beginning. And in Cole's experience, most cases didn't start with certainty. They started with one true thing sitting in a room full of constructed lies, waiting for someone stubborn enough to find it. He'd spent 6 years being dismissed, discredited, and managed into quiet. Julian Carrington had made one critical miscalculation in his otherwise careful architecture. He'd used the same blueprint twice, and the man he'd helped destroy the first time around had kept every page of the original. They worked through the night, not romantically, not cinematically. The reality was two people hunched over a cracked hinge laptop in a fourth-floor office that smelled like old coffee and dry erase marker, cross-referencing financial records against 6-year-old investigation files while the city outside went through its quiet hours and came out the other side. Cole's back hurt by 2 a.m. Victoria developed a tension headache somewhere around 3 that she managed by pressing 2 fingers against her left temple periodically and not mentioning it. They ran out of coffee at 4, and neither of them suggested making more. What they built, through those hours, was a package. Cole had done this enough times to know that evidence didn't speak for itself the way people assumed it did. Raw data was just noise unless it was organized into a narrative that a room full of people under pressure could follow in real time. So he organized. He sequenced. He built the story of what Julian Carrington had done the way you built a case for people who hadn't been living inside it for the past several hours, starting with what everyone in that boardroom already believed to be true, then dismantling it one documented fact at a time. Victoria handled the corporate record side. She had the institutional knowledge that Cole lacked. She knew which signatures were authentic, which approval chains were real, which board resolutions meant what they appeared to mean, and which ones were being used to mean something else. She moved through the company's document archive with the fluency of someone who'd built half of it herself. And every time she found something, a mismatched timestamp, a vendor authorization with the wrong approval chain, a financial entry that pointed nowhere real, she flagged it with a yellow sticky note from the stack on Cole's desk and set it in the pile. By 5:30 a.m., the pile was substantial. Cole photographed every page with his phone, backed it to 2 separate cloud accounts, then emailed a compressed file to his personal lawyer, a woman named Ruth Adeyemi, who had helped him survive the legal fallout of the Meridian collapse and who he trusted more than almost anyone, with a subject line that said, "Hold until I contact you. Do not open unless I don't check in by noon." Ruth texted back within 4 minutes. "This better not be what I think it is." He responded, "Worse. I'll explain later." Her next text was just, "Be careful, Cole." He set the phone down and looked at Victoria, who was reading something on the laptop with her shoulders drawn tight and her jaw set in the specific way it got when she found something that made her angry. "Talk to me," he said. "Julian's travel records," she said. "I have executive travel logged through the company system. He was in Wilmington, Delaware 3 times in the last 18 months. She turned the laptop toward Cole. "The registered agent office for Draper, Collis, and Webb is in Wilmington." "That's not proof," Cole said. "He could have been there for anything." "He billed the travel as regional partnership development," Victoria said, "which is an internal budget line that falls under his sole authorization. No secondary approval required." She paused. "I created that budget line for him 2 years ago because I trusted his judgment on regional deals." Cole looked at the screen, then at her. "You didn't know." "I keep saying that," Victoria said. "It keeps feeling less true." "It is true," Cole said. "Knowing it is true and feeling it that way are different things. Both can be real at the same time." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression that wasn't quite gratitude, but was in the same neighborhood. Then she turned back to the screen. At 6:15, Cole called a forensic accountant he'd worked with on 2 previous cases. A meticulous, deeply uncharismatic man named Peter Eng, who had the specific gift of being able to explain financial fraud to non-financial people without making them feel stupid. Peter answered on the 4th ring, sounding only slightly like someone who'd been asleep. "I need you today," Cole said. "Emergency timeline, financial document forensics, metadata analysis, and formatting verification. There's also a vendor registration trace. Today as in you need to be looking at files within the next 2 hours. A pause. "This going to turn into something complicated?" "Already is." Another pause. Longer. "Rate is doubled for emergency timeline." "Fine," Cole said. Victoria, who was listening, didn't blink. "I'm sending you an encrypted package. Everything you need to know is in it. I need a preliminary report by 10 a.m. "Cole," Peter said, 10 a.m. is... I know what 10 a.m. is, Peter. A sigh. Send it. Cole sent it. Then he made a call to Sylvia at Hargrove's. She didn't answer, so he left a message asking her to confirm in writing that the security footage from the previous evening had been preserved and that no one from Ashford Global or any affiliated party had requested its deletion. He'd follow up in person if needed. At 6:45, Victoria stood up and stretched, her arms overhead, her spine making a sound that she acknowledged with a wince, and then looked at Cole with the eyes of someone running on reserves. "The meeting is at 7, she said. "I know. Julian will have the board position before I get there. He's had all night." She lowered her arms. "He'll come at me on 3 fronts: the financial crisis, my competence, and last night. He knows I didn't sign, he knows someone interfered, and by now he's probably built a version of last night that makes me look unstable." "Probably," Cole agreed. "So we don't go in responding to his version. We go in with our own." "You said we," Victoria said. "Figure of speech." "Is it?" Cole thought about that. He thought about Ruth's text, "Be careful," and about the photo on his phone of Maisie asleep with a book on her face. He thought about his firm, 4 years of careful rebuilding, the client relationships that depended on him being someone whose name didn't carry trouble. He thought about what walking into an Ashford Global board meeting uninvited, with evidence of fraud against the company's own COO, would do to his professional profile if it went wrong. Then he thought about the whiteboard. Julian Carrington's name with 2 underlines. A Delaware law firm connecting 2 frauds across 6 years. 41 folders in a fireproof cabinet that he'd carried through 3 moves because some part of him had never accepted that it was over. "It's a figure of speech," he said, "that I intend to follow through on." Victoria looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her blazer from the chair arm, shook it once, and put it back on. The transformation was visible and immediate. The posture straightened, the face composed itself into the particular authority that belonged to a CEO who had walked into difficult rooms for 8 years. "Then let's go," she said. They stopped at Cole's apartment first. It was on the way, barely, so he could change his shirt and check on Maisie. The babysitter, a college student named Priya, who lived 2 floors up, was awake and unfazed. Maisie was eating cereal at the kitchen table in her school clothes, her hair still half undone, apparently unconcerned that her father had not been home when she woke up. "You look tired," Maisie said, observing him with the devastating accuracy of a 9-year-old. "I am tired," Cole said. "Did you solve the thing?" He'd never been specific with her about his work, but she'd developed her own impression of it over the years. That he spent his time finding things people had hidden and returning them to the people they belonged to, which was not entirely inaccurate. "Working on it," he said. She accepted this and returned to her cereal. Cole changed in 4 minutes, kissed the top of her head, thanked Priya, and went back downstairs to where Victoria was waiting in the car she'd arranged. Not her usual driver, she'd explained, because she didn't know who her usual driver reported to anymore. A small detail that said a great deal about what months of slow paranoia did to a person's relationship with their own life. The Ashford Global headquarters was a 40-story building with a glass facade that caught the morning light in a way that was either architecturally intentional or accidentally beautiful. Cole had passed it before without thinking much about it. He thought about it now, standing on the sidewalk looking up at it at 10 minutes to 7, feeling the gap between the building and the 4th-floor office with the electrical-taped laptop. "The boardroom is on 38, Victoria said beside him. "Julian always books 38 for internal leadership meetings. Better view. He thinks the view communicates something." "What does it communicate?" "That he controls the room people aspire to be in," she said. She looked up at the building with an expression Cole couldn't entirely read. Complicated, proprietary, tired. "My father built this company. I spent 8 years growing it, and Julian spent that whole time waiting to take it." Cole didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. They went in. The lobby reception, the elevator, the 38th floor, all of it passed in the contained quiet of 2 people who had run out of things to prepare and were now simply moving toward the thing. Cole felt the elevator ride the way he'd felt certain operations. The specific quality of the seconds before a situation became irrevocable. The boardroom had glass walls. Cole could see through them from the hallway. 12 people already seated or standing, the murmur of conversation, coffee cups and tablets on the long table. And at the far end of the room, standing with his back to the door and his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Julian Carrington. He was taller than Cole had imagined. Mid-50s, well-built in the way of men who kept themselves fit as a form of professional communication. Silver at the temples, navy suit, the easy posture of a man who had been the most powerful person in every room he'd entered for years. He turned when the boardroom door opened. His eyes went to Victoria first, then to Cole. And in the half-second before his expression organized itself back into controlled pleasantness, in that one unguarded half-second, Cole saw it. Not fear exactly. The specific recalibration of a man who had planned for one scenario and was now looking at a different one. Good. Recalibration cost him something. Every moment he spent adjusting was a moment the room was waiting. "Victoria," Julian said warmly. Boardroom warm, the kind of warmth you could turn on and off like a faucet. "I'm glad you came. I was concerned after last night." "I'm sure you were," Victoria said. She walked to her seat at the head of the table without looking at him again. The room watched her. Cole followed and took a position along the wall. Not at the table, not a participant, just present and visible. Julian looked at Cole. "I don't believe you're on the guest list." "Cole Bennett," Cole said. "Independent advisory consultant. Ms. Ashford's retained me on a governance matter. I'm here in an observer capacity." "This is an internal leadership meeting," Julian said. "Observer capacity isn't—" "Julian!" Victoria's voice came from the head of the table, even and unbothered. "Sit down." The room felt that. The people around the table, senior executives, most of them, the people who had worked under both of them and understood the architecture of power in this company, watched Julian receive it. He sat down. But his eyes went to the man on his left, Harwick, from the restaurant, and something passed between them. A small tightening, a confirmation that this was not the meeting they had prepared for. Julian opened the meeting himself, which told Cole something about how thoroughly he'd already positioned himself in this room. He spoke for 12 minutes about the financial situation, the fabricated crisis, delivered with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed it until it felt like memory. He used phrases like acute exposure and governance vulnerability and leadership continuity in the way people use technical language to make decisions seem inevitable rather than chosen. He referenced the previous evening obliquely, describing it as a preliminary discussion that had been unfortunately disrupted. Cole watched the board members while Julian spoke. Some of them he could read, the ones who were uncomfortable, who kept their faces carefully neutral in the way people did when they'd been told a version of events they weren't sure they believed. Others were harder, already settled into whatever position Julian had established in the conversations Cole couldn't see. When Julian finished, he looked at Victoria with the specific expression of a man offering her a graceful surrender. "Victoria, I know this is difficult, but the board's fiduciary responsibility requires us to act. The numbers don't leave us a choice." Victoria folded her hands on the table. "The numbers are fabricated," she said. The room went very quiet. Julian's expression shifted into something that looked like concerned patience. "I understand this is—" "I'm going to show you," Victoria said. She looked down the table. "Peter, can you pull up the presentation on the room screen?" Cole looked toward the door, and there was Petering, rumpled, carrying a laptop bag, looking like a man who had worked for 3.5 hours and not enjoyed a moment of it, connecting to the room's display system with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough not to be intimidated by the room. Cole had called Peter back at 8:15 after the preliminary report confirmed everything they'd suspected. He'd asked Peter to be at the building at 6:50. Peter had grumbled. Peter was here. The screen at the end of the boardroom came to life. Cole pushed off the wall and walked to stand beside Peter's position, facing the table. This was the moment where his training either held or it didn't. The ability to stand in a room where he was actively unwelcome and be the least reactive person in it. He looked at Julian. Julian was looking at the screen with the expression of someone who had not yet decided how to characterize what they were seeing. Cole started talking. Not loudly, not with performance. He He spoke the way he'd been trained to brief, clear, sequential, each point connected to the next, no wasted words. He walked the room through the vendor analysis first. 11 vendors in the audit reports. 6 incorporated in the last 22 months. 4 with mail forwarding addresses. 3 sharing a registered agent in Delaware. He let Peter advance the slides, each piece of documentation appearing on screen as Cole named it, the visual confirmation landing a half-second after the verbal, which was intentional. It gave the room time to absorb, and it made each piece of evidence feel verified twice. He watched Julian's face. Julian had moved into containment mode. His expression was concerned rather than alarmed, his body language communicating the performance of a man hearing troubling allegations he intended to address reasonably. But his right hand, resting on the table, had closed slowly into a loose fist. Cole moved to the metadata analysis. Peter's report showed that both fabricated audit documents had been created on the same date, 11 days ago, despite being labeled as Q1 and Q2 reports respectively. The file properties showed they'd been built in a template that differed measurably from Ashford Global's standard document system. He put the comparison on screen. The difference was subtle. It was also irrefutable. "This doesn't," Harwick started. "I'm not finished," Cole said, not rudely, just factually. He moved to the Delaware connection, Draper, Collis, and Webb, the registration link between the current shell companies and the Meridian network from 6 years ago. He was careful here. He named the facts, the documentation, the registration records. He did not make accusations he hadn't documented. He presented the evidence of connection and let the room understand what it meant. By the time he got to the restaurant footage, Sylvia had confirmed its preservation by email at 8:50 a.m., and Cole had it on Peter's laptop. The room had gone from carefully neutral to something raw. 3 of the 12 people at the table were no longer looking at Julian. They were looking at their own hands, or at the screen, or at the middle distance, in the specific way people looked when they were reassessing everything they thought they understood about the last several months. Julian spoke. "These allegations are serious," he said. His voice was still composed, impressively so, and Cole noted it the way you noted a capable opponent. "And I understand why they've been constructed this way. But Cole Bennett has a documented history of bringing unsubstantiated fraud claims against organizations in which he had a financial or personal interest. The board should be aware of that context." Cole had expected this. He thought about it on the elevator ride up. The old damage, weaponized again, precisely the way it had been weaponized the first time. "That's true," Cole said. "In 2018, my investigation into Vantage Meridian Partners was discredited by 2 news articles whose primary sources were later shown to be connected to the Meridian network itself. I've brought that documentation as well." He nodded at Peter, who put it on screen. The same registered agent that connected Meridian's shell companies to each other appears in the current vendor registrations, which means the people who discredited my original investigation are likely the same people who built this one. He paused. "I'd be happy to address the 2018 situation in as much detail as the board requires, but I'd suggest the documentation currently on screen addresses the question of my credibility more directly than an 11-year-old character reference from the people being accused." Julian looked at Cole. Something had shifted in his eyes. The pleasantness was gone, finally, and what was underneath it was colder and more honest. "You have no idea what you're involved in," Julian said quietly. "I think I do," Cole said. "I've been involved in it for 6 years." The room held that. Then Victoria stood up. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't perform anything. She stood at the head of the table of the company her father had built, and that she had grown, and she spoke with the specific authority of someone who had stopped trying to manage how they were perceived and had decided to simply be honest. "I should have looked harder at some things," she said. "The Vantage Meridian engagement 6 years ago, I signed off on it without the due diligence it required. Someone I trusted recommended it, and I didn't push past that. I'm telling you that now because I think we've spent enough time in this company managing image instead of managing truth." She looked around the table slowly. "The documentation you've seen this morning is real. The financial crisis you were told to prepare for is not. And the governance transfer you are being asked to ratify was designed to remove me and place control of this company in the hands of the people who built the fiction you've been operating inside. She looked at Julian. I'm not going to ask for your resignation, she said. I'm going to ask the board to approve an immediate independent investigation conducted by outside counsel into the financial documentation presented in the Emergency Governance Transfer Agreement and the vendor records associated with it. If the investigation exonerates you, that will be on record. A pause. If it doesn't, that will be on record too. Julian was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the room started to feel the weight of his silence rather than his words. Then he reached forward, picked up the coffee cup in front of him, and set it back down without drinking from it. You're making a serious mistake, he said. I've made serious mistakes, Victoria said. This isn't one of them. The vote for the independent investigation was called 20 minutes later. It passed 9-3. The three who voted against it were Julian, Harwick, and a board member named Frost, who had been on the board since Victoria's father's time, and whom Cole suspected had more connections to the old network than he'd yet been able to document. He made a note of Frost's name. Julian left the boardroom without speaking to anyone. Cole watched him go, the straight spine, the unhurried pace, and felt something that wasn't satisfaction exactly. More like the particular exhaustion of a moment you'd been moving toward for a very long time, finally arriving. The other board members moved in clusters, talking in the lowered voices of people processing something significant. A few of them looked at Cole with expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness, to something that might have been respect. He didn't read too much into any of it. Victoria appeared beside him. 9-3, she said. 3 is 3, Cole said. 2 of them know more than they voted. Expect them to move their documentation in the next 24 hours. Outside counsel is already on call, she said. I made that arrangement at 5 a.m. Cole looked at her. You did that before we had the vote. I did that before we came upstairs, she said. I wasn't going to walk in here without a contingency. He almost smiled at that. Good instinct. I have some. Outside the boardroom, through the glass walls, the city sat in its morning routine 38 floors below. Cole's phone had 3 missed calls. One from Ruth, one from Maisie's school confirming a pickup arrangement, one from a client whose spreadsheet question was going to feel very small when he eventually returned it. He thought about his office, the whiteboard with its 2 columns finally connected by a solid line, the fireproof cabinet and its 41 folders that had spent 6 years being the most expensive storage project in a small consulting firm. He thought about Patricia Shen, the bookkeeper who'd brought him invoices and then been pressured into silence, and wondered if she'd ever found out what happened next. He'd find a way to let her know. Victoria was talking to 2 board members across the room, her voice steady, her posture straight, managing the aftermath with the competence of someone returning to what they actually did well. Cole watched for a moment, then looked away. Not every part of this was his. He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on a chair near the wall. His back still hurt. He needed to sleep. He needed to eat something that wasn't coffee or the vending machine granola bar he'd consumed at 4:15 a.m. in a moment of desperation. He had a daughter who'd pointed out he looked tired with the specific accuracy that only people who loved you were capable of, and she was right, and he was going to pick her up from school this afternoon if it was the last thing he did. He headed for the door. Cole. Victoria's voice. He stopped and turned. She'd broken off from the board members and crossed the room toward him, and there was something in her expression that was different from the composed authority of 5 minutes ago. More direct. Less managed. Thank you, she said. I know that's insufficient. I know you didn't have to. She stopped herself, tried again. You spent 6 years carrying something that my company helped cause, and you still walked into that restaurant and picked up a napkin. Cole thought about how to answer that, tried a few things in his head, and discarded them. The napkin had 1 word on it, he said. Wasn't a complicated decision. Victoria looked at him. It was to me, she said. He nodded once. She nodded back. It was not elegant or cinematic, and neither of them pretended otherwise. But it was honest, and in a room that had spent the last hour dismantling carefully constructed lies, honest felt like the right thing to be. Cole walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. and the doors closed behind him, and for the first time since he'd ordered salmon in a restaurant he had no business being in. The tight coiled readiness in his chest let itself down slightly and allowed him to simply feel how tired he was. The case wasn't over. The independent investigation would take months. Julian Carrington's lawyers would fight. The 3 dissenting votes on the board would create problems that weren't yet visible. Cole would get subpoenaed, almost certainly. His firm's name would appear in financial news again, which cut both ways. None of that had resolved. But the lie was out of the room now, and the truth was on record, and 6 years of carrying 41 folders through 3 moves had turned out to be something other than stubbornness after all. The elevator reached the lobby. Cole walked out into the morning. The independent investigation took 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. Cole knew the exact count because he'd marked it the way he marked things that mattered. Not on a calendar, not with any ceremony, just a running awareness in the back of his mind that registered time passing the way a body registered a healing injury. You didn't think about it constantly, but you always knew it was there. The outside counsel Victoria retained was a firm called Hargrove and Lind, no relation to the restaurant, which Cole noted with the particular dry humor of a man who had stopped expecting life to be tidy. They were methodical, thorough, and deeply uninterested in anyone's comfort, which was exactly what the situation required. They went through Ashford Global's financial records the way you went through a building after an earthquake, not just looking at what had fallen, but testing every wall that was still standing. What they found was worse than Cole and Victoria had documented in the office on that first night. Not in kind, the shape of it was exactly what they'd mapped, but in scale. Julian Carrington had been running parallel financial schemes inside Ashford Global for not 2 years, but 4. The ghost vendor network was the visible piece. Underneath it was a quieter mechanism, a series of contract amendments approved through budget lines that fell within his sole authorization that had redirected approximately $63 million in vendor payments to accounts connected to entities in the Draper, Collis, and Web registration network. Not as a single large transfer that might trigger automatic flags. In increments. Over 48 months. Patient, disciplined, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it specifically. Cole looked at that number, 63 million, and thought about Patricia Shen and her 70 pages of invoices. He thought about 6 years. He thought about the 2 news articles and the 3 sources who'd been connected to the network and the specific grinding feeling of watching something true get buried under enough polished language that people stopped wanting to look at it. He'd been right. He'd been right the whole time. And it had still cost him 6 years. He didn't know what to do with that exactly. It wasn't as simple as vindication, because vindication implied the whole thing resolved cleanly, and nothing about any of this had resolved cleanly. The damage to his career had been real. The years had been real. The boxes he'd moved 3 times had contained real paper, representing real harm done to real people who were still living with the consequences. Being right hadn't prevented any of that. It had just, eventually, with a lot of help from a dropped napkin and a woman with enough courage to stay in a hard room, brought the record into better alignment with the truth. That had to be enough. Most days it was. Julian Carrington was arrested on a Tuesday morning 4 months after the board meeting. Cole wasn't there for it. He heard about it from Ruth, who had been CC'd on the outside counsel's regulatory referral, and called him at 7:15 a.m. with a restraint in her voice that told him she was trying not to make too much of a moment that she understood was complicated for him. "They got Harwick, too," Ruth said, "and 2 executives from the Delaware firm." "Frost?" Cole asked. "Still under investigation. Nothing filed yet." Cole nodded at the phone, which was a useless gesture but happened anyway. "Okay." "Cole," Ruth said, "are you—" "I'm fine," he said. Then, because Ruth had known him long enough to know when fine was accurate and when it was just the word he used as a placeholder, "I will be fine." "That's more honest," she said. He picked Maisie up from school that afternoon. She came out of the building with her backpack half unzipped and a drawing she'd made in art class that she wanted to show him before they got to the car because she couldn't wait that long. "It was a dog," she explained, even though they didn't have a dog, and she was fully aware they didn't have a dog, but she'd drawn it because dogs were good, and she liked drawing things that were good. Cole looked at the drawing. It was an extremely abstract dog, rendered in green crayon with what appeared to be 7 legs. "It's got an extra leg," he said. "It's a special dog," Maisie said, with the total certainty of someone who did not accept criticism of her artistic vision. He took her for ice cream, which was a school night violation of a rule he'd set himself and occasionally suspended. She ordered strawberry and spent the walk back to the car telling him about a conflict she was having with a classmate named Devin, who had told everyone that seahorses weren't real animals, which Maisie considered an offense against basic biological fact and had said so, apparently at some volume. "Were you polite about it?" Cole asked. Maisie considered this with visible effort. "I was accurate," she said finally. Cole thought about boardrooms and evidence packages and 11-year cover-ups. "Sometimes those aren't the same thing," he said. "Devin was wrong, though." "Devin was wrong," Cole agreed. "And you can be right and still think about how you say it." Maisie ate her ice cream and thought about this with the grudging expression of a 9-year-old encountering a piece of advice she didn't want to agree with, but couldn't find a way to argue against. Cole watched her and felt something settle in his chest. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. 3 weeks after the arrest, Victoria called him. Not to his office line, not through Maya. She called his cell phone, which meant she'd kept the number from the long night in his office, which meant she'd kept it on purpose. "The board voted yesterday," she said, when he picked up. "Some structural reforms passed. Independent audit committee, external oversight on executive budget authorizations, staggered board terms to prevent—" She paused. "You don't need the details." "I don't," Cole agreed, "but I'm glad they passed." "Frost resigned," she said, "before the vote. Quietly, which means we may never get the full picture of his involvement." "That's how it usually goes," Cole said. "People at that level almost never face the full accounting." A brief silence. "That doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me," Cole said. "I've learned to keep working anyway." Another pause, different from the first one, softer around the edges. "I owe you something I don't know how to properly pay," Victoria said. Her voice had lost the boardroom quality. No management in it, no performance, just a person saying a true thing. "Not financially. I mean, I can, and I intend to ensure your firm is compensated fairly for—" "Victoria." "I'm trying to say something and doing it badly," she said. "I know," Cole said. "I can hear you doing it." She actually laughed at that. Short, a little surprised at itself. "I've been told I'm better in writing." "Well, then write it down and send it to me and I'll read it," Cole said. "Or don't. What you've already said is enough." "Is it?" He thought about the napkin, about sitting in the corner of a restaurant and watching a woman hold herself together under pressure that most people would have folded under, about the long night in his office and the whiteboard and the coffee that went cold, about walking into a boardroom on no sleep with a cracked hinge laptop and a forensic accountant who grumbled and showed up anyway. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They didn't wrap it up neatly after that. The conversation moved into practical territory. Questions about the investigation timeline, a few specifics about documentation she needed for the regulatory process. Cole answered what he could and referred her to Ruth for the rest. Professional, clean, the language of two people managing the aftermath of something that had been, for a concentrated period of time, anything but professional or clean. Before they hung up, Victoria said, "Maisie, the girl in the photo on your desk, she's yours?" "She is," Cole said. "She looks like she has opinions," Victoria said. "She has opinions about everything," Cole said, "including the biological validity of seahorses." Another pause. "Would you—" "Sometime. Not now, not while all of this is still—" She stopped, started more carefully. "Would it be strange if I wanted to meet her?" Cole looked out the window of his office at the city's mid-morning gray. He thought about what it would mean to say yes to that question. Not just practically, but in the larger sense, the way one answer opened a door rather than closed it, and the way doors worked, which was that once you walked through them, you were somewhere new. He'd spent 6 years being careful. Careful with his cases, careful with his reputation, careful with Maisie's world, keeping it tight and known and controlled enough that the unpredictable parts of his work, didn't spill into the home he was trying to be steady inside. It was a reasonable way to live. It had kept things manageable. It had also kept things small. It wouldn't be strange, he said. 2 months passed. The investigation continued its slow bureaucratic progress. Julian's legal team mounted the defense that expensive lawyers always mounted, attacking methodology, questioning chain of custody, filing motions that existed primarily to cost time and money. It was the machine doing what the machine did. Cole testified twice, both times calmly, and waited for the process to move at its own pace because that was the only speed it had. His firm picked up 3 new clients in the months following the Ashford case. Word had circulated, carefully, and through the specific channels where these things circulated, that Bennett Consulting Group had gone into a very difficult corporate situation and come out with documentation that had held up. Nobody mentioned the Ashford name publicly, the case was still active, and the lawyers on all sides were protective of the details. But the reputation moved the way reputation moved, which was quietly and faster than you expected. Cole hired a part-time researcher named Danny, 26, who had a background in forensic accounting and a personality that could be charitably described as relentlessly precise and less charitably described as exhausting to argue with, which meant she was excellent at the work and occasionally difficult to be in a small office with. He fixed the laptop hinge. Finally. Also the office chair's left rear wheel. Small things, but the accumulation of small things left unattended had a way of announcing itself eventually, and he decided this was the year he stopped letting minor problems compound. In the late spring, on a Thursday evening when the city was finally warm enough that people were eating outside on the sidewalks and the sky stayed light past 7, Victoria came to his office. Not for a meeting, not with documents. She knocked on the door at 6:30, which she'd told him to expect, and when he opened it, she was wearing something without a corporate blazer for the first time he'd ever seen her, which made her look like a person rather than a role. She'd brought dinner, takeout from a place she liked, she explained, which turned out to be a Thai restaurant 2 neighborhoods over. She'd also brought, without commenting on it, a slightly nicer coffee maker than the 10-year-old one on his counter, which she set next to the existing one with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had decided to improve a situation rather than ask permission to. Cole looked at the 2 coffee makers side by side. "The old one still works," he said. "I know," Victoria said. "You can keep both." They ate at his desk, which was the only surface large enough, with the Meridian files pushed to one side and the takeout containers arranged in the space that remained. Cole's whiteboard had been erased and rewritten with a new case, a real estate company with questionable subcontractor invoicing, and the name Julian Carrington was gone from it, replaced by names he hadn't heard of 2 months ago. Victoria looked at the new board for a moment. "Already moved on," she said. "The work keeps coming," Cole said. "That's not a complaint. Is it strange? Going from that," she gestured vaguely at the erased space, "to a new case. Like it just becomes one file among others." Cole thought about how to answer honestly. "It doesn't become small," he said. "It becomes past. Which isn't the same thing. The past is still there. It just stops being what you're looking at." Victoria ate and considered that. "I haven't moved on as cleanly," she said. "I find myself going back to things. The Vantage Meridian approval, the things I didn't question when Julian recommended them. I keep looking for the moment I should have known." "There probably wasn't one," Cole said. "Not the way you mean. He was careful. He showed you what he wanted you to see for 11 years. But I trusted him." "You hired someone and trusted them," Cole said. "That's what employing people requires. You can't run an organization from a position of permanent suspicion. The whole thing collapses. You trusted him because the evidence he gave you supported trust." He paused. "The failure wasn't in your judgment. It was in his character." Victoria looked at him. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about it in relation to myself, mostly," Cole said. 6 years of wondering what I missed in the Meridian investigation, what I should have seen earlier, where I went wrong. He leaned back in his chair, which made its usual complaint from the wheel he'd already fixed, a ghost of the old noise. "Eventually I figured out that I didn't go wrong. The people running the fraud went wrong. Spending my energy on what I should have done differently was just, It was letting them keep living rent-free in my head. Easier said than let go, Victoria said. Much easier, Cole agreed. I still pay the rent sometimes, just less often than I used to. There was a comfortable quality to the silence that followed, the kind that existed between people who had shared something real and didn't feel the need to fill every space with conversation. Cole had not experienced this specific comfort in a long time, and recognized it the way you recognize something you'd forgotten existed. He thought about what Victoria had asked back in those early months. Would it be strange if I wanted to meet her? And about the door that question had opened, and about the fact that Maisie was currently with her grandmother for the weekend and would be dropped off here tomorrow afternoon with the particular energy of a kid returning from a grandparent visit, which was to say, high volume, full of stories, and carrying some amount of candy that had been provided in the specific grandparental spirit of cheerful boundary violation. Maisie's back tomorrow afternoon, Cole said. Victoria looked up. I know, you mentioned. She said it carefully, like something she'd been holding gently. I wasn't assuming. I know you weren't, Cole said. I'm telling you because you asked if it would be strange, and I said it wouldn't, and I meant it. He looked at her directly. Come by. Around 4. She'll want to show you something. She always has something she's working on. Last week it was a list of every animal that technically qualifies as a fish, but that most people don't think of as a fish. The week before that, it was a paper about why cereal is a type of soup. Victoria stared at him. Is cereal a type of soup? Her argument is more compelling than you'd expect, Cole said. Victoria laughed. A real one. Longer than the short, surprised laugh on the phone. It changed her face in a way that Cole noted and then made himself stop analyzing because some things didn't need to be categorized. They finished dinner. Victoria helped stack the takeout containers, which Cole put in the trash. She looked at the old coffee maker one more time, seemed to reach a decision, and turned to him. The restaurant, she said, where this started. Hargrove's, Cole said. I want to go back, she said. Not for any particular reason, not to mark an occasion or make it mean something symbolic. She stopped. I haven't been able to go back and have it be ordinary. I walk past it and I think about that room and the napkin and She made a small gesture. I'd like to go back and have it just be a restaurant. Cole understood this. The way certain locations collected weight from what had happened in them, and the only way to redistribute that weight was to return and let ordinary time pass over the place until it became ordinary again. Okay, he said. Not tonight, she said. I figured, Cole said. When you're ready. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair, reaching for it with the automatic precision she had about folding and collecting her things, the small habit that he'd registered that first night and had become, over months, simply familiar. Cole, she said at the door. Yeah. She stood in the doorway of the fourth-floor office with its mismatched chairs and new coffee maker and whiteboard full of someone else's problem, and she looked at him with the direct, unmanaged look that he'd come to understand was what she looked like when she'd stopped performing and was just present. I spent 8 years believing that the way you survived was to need nothing from anyone, she said. That needing things made you a liability. To yourself, to the company, to... She stopped. I'd written that into my whole operating system, and then I was sitting in a glass room with no phone and blocked exits, and I wrote one word on a napkin because I had run out of ways to not need help. Cole said nothing. She wasn't finished. And you picked it up, she said. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. You just picked it up. She paused. I think about that. What it means that the thing that saved everything was that small. Cole thought about what to say. He tried a few things and found them too large or too small or too wrapped up in their own neatness. Sometimes the smallest thing is the only true one, he said finally. It wasn't eloquent. It was what he had. Victoria nodded. She held his eyes for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she said goodnight, and the door closed behind her, and Cole stood in the middle of his office in the quiet of a spring Thursday evening and listened to her footsteps on the hallway carpet, and then the elevator, and then the building was just the building again. He looked at the new coffee maker on the counter, then at the old one beside it. He turned on the old one out of habit. While it ran, he went to the whiteboard and looked at the new case. The real estate company, the subcontractor invoices, The ordinary ongoing work of finding the true thing in a room full of constructed versions of it. He uncapped the marker, added a note he'd thought of during dinner, connecting two vendor names he'd been meaning to cross-reference. His phone buzzed. A text from Maisie's grandmother with a photo of Maisie asleep in the back seat with her mouth open and her shoes on the wrong feet, captioned, "She fought hard but lost at mile marker 47. Cole smiled at his phone, the real, unmanaged kind. He thought about what tomorrow would look like. Maisie returning with candy and fish taxonomy. Victoria at 4 o'clock, and whatever that became. The investigation grinding forward in its institutional way, slowly building toward whatever accounting was possible. His new researcher, Danny, who would have thoughts about the real estate subcontractors that would probably be right and definitely be expressed with more certainty than was strictly comfortable. The ordinary, complicated forward motion of a life. He thought about the last 6 years. The boxes he'd moved, the 41 folders, the 2 newspaper articles and the 3 sources, and the investigation that had gone quiet. He thought about walking into a restaurant for a canceled meeting and a quiet dinner, and finding, through a frosted glass partition, a situation that his whole history had prepared him to read. He thought about what it meant, not in a grand sense, not with any architecture of meaning he could fully articulate, that the thing he'd spent 6 years carrying had turned out to be exactly what was needed, at exactly the right moment, in exactly the wrong restaurant. He didn't have a clean answer to that. He suspected he never would, and that the absence of a clean answer was itself part of the truth of it. Some things didn't resolve into lessons. They just became part of the record, part of the accumulated weight of a life that had had real things happen in it, good and terrible and clarifying and costly, and that continued forward anyway. The coffee maker finished its cycle. Cole poured a cup, sat down at his desk. Outside, the city moved through its evening in the ordinary way. Traffic, distant music from somewhere, the last light leaving the sky in gradients of orange and gray. The kind of evening that happened constantly and that most people on most days moved through without noting. Cole noted it. Then he picked up his pen and went back to work.